Good evening. This is Ted Holden, back again from Southeast Texas, and tonight I want to talk about the last several decades worth of images which have been coming back from our quasi black op space program. And these images, we have a few from Ganymede, which I don't really want to go over tonight. The images I want to talk about tonight are coming back from Mars. And I've got a computer here which I've liberated from Microsoft. It's running Peppermint Linux, which I'd recommend. I'm having to use two different browsers, right? It's like Opera doesn't do a good job of handling Google Hangouts, and Firefox doesn't do a good job of handling PDF images. Starting from Facebook, you have to use Facebook for things like this. Facebook groups have taken the place of what we used to call Usenet, which was the global BBS system before you had web browsers or anything like that. So what I'm going to want to do is to first share my own screen here, share screen and desktop, and you immediately get this Einstein mirror clock, which you just have to put down. Okay, and then I'm going to want to also put this Firefox browser down and open. Like I say, the Opera browser does a better job. And let's start with Facebook and a group which is called Ganymede Hypothesis. You only have to search on Ganymede Hypothesis on Facebook, and it brings you to this page. And oh boy, I'm sorry. It's like it brings you to this page, right, which is your normal page for the Ganymede hypothesis. You've got a picture of Jupiter here, which used to be a red dwarf star. And this doesn't show very well here, but it's like a picture of a sort of a freshwater ocean world, which is what Ganymede used to be, right? It had light both from the sun, which you can see here, and from the dwarf star, and it was sort of a paradise at any rate. The first thing you do is go to the files section of the group, which is where we just were. And the first thing you want to look at is a document which is called Mars Images.pdf. Okay, so let's look at this, and we get an indication that a PDF file has been pulled up here. You double click that. It brings it up, and hit Control plus a few times, make it big enough for older people to read. Okay, and this is what I want to look at. This talks about what we were seeing and hearing back when Ike was the president of the United States and John Kennedy starting in 1960. And you heard about the moon every day, right? It was always this big deal about getting to the moon. That was as big as the Mouse Club. Okay, and that's big for like 1960 or 59, 60. You heard about this every day, and then eventually they got to the moon, right? They only talk about something for so long before you do it. And they did it, right? But what the document says is that there were several more Apollo missions over the space of a few years, right? Starting from 1969, 70, 70, And then all of a sudden it just dropped off the radar screen. Manned space exploration, been there, done that. Time now to get back to serious business, such as running and fine-tuning our welfare state. Is that believable? To me, that's not believable. There's another possibility. Could it possibly be that whatever those people saw up there messed their minds so badly that manned space exploration was made into a black op at that point? Most people simply haven't heard any more about it since then. That's the working hypothesis here. Now, normally, a conspiracy theory is going to be everybody's last choice as a means of explaining something. But the situation we have with these Mars images and with NASA is not normal, okay? What we're dealing with something which is very strange. We're dealing with images which are very strange. The images they can't help but put those up on the internet, right? It's like that's their charter, required to do that. Just the entire situation with Mars images is exploding on the internet at present. There seems to be several reasons for this. Large numbers of rolling probe images are coming available online. NASA and ESA websites, and the editing and censoring which have been observed in such images in the past have diminished or stopped. Right now, there were cases starting from the early 2000s. I mean, it appeared as if NASA was censoring a lot of this stuff. Interesting parts of these images were being smeared out, just using brightness and contrast and just image handling controls. It may be that disgruntled employees at NASA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory have decided that enough is enough, taking it upon themselves to start releasing uncensored images and video clips. It may be that India's putting a satellite over Mars for less than petty cash has presented NASA with a sort of an ultimatum in the form of the specter of other nations releasing uncensored images. And then there's a simpler explanation, which says that NASA is just a government agency. It doesn't have the manpower or the number of eyes it would take to fine comb all of these images, to go over all these images with a fine-tooth comb and try to weed out things which they wouldn't want the public having access to. The internet does have that number of eyes, and certainly Facebook groups have the number of eyes to do that, right? You're getting a dozen or so Facebook groups which are completely dedicated to going over these MSL images. These are the Mars Scientific Laboratory rolling probe images with the high resolution camera that have been coming back like for the last 3 years. Okay, and in cases where these images used to be smeared, it's like people found ways to recognize the effect and to unsmear them. You know, so the number of these images have been recovered from the smearing process. You've got websites which contain or amount to repositories for these kinds of images. So Richard Hoagland's site. Richard Hoagland was the first person to try to go public with the story of the images, which came back in 1976. Okay, you've got UFA.space, right? You've got MarsAnomalyResearch.com, and there's several others. The first inkling that NASA might already have humans on Mars on a black op basis came with Pathfinder images and a particular image which was called PIA 04995. This came in around 1997 or 98. The lower right-hand corner of that image shows a number of artificial things as well as several clear and fairly recent footprints. Okay, this is the bottom corner of PIA 04995. Now, this is not a 10,000-year-old footprint. This is fairly recent. I mean, it's the first indication that there might have been that NASA has had people on Mars. You went from 76 to about 97. NASA had 20 years to play around on Mars without any oversight, without anybody checking up on them, without anybody taking notice of what they may or may not have been doing on Mars, okay? You know, you had images starting in 76 of the Cydonia region, which showed a gigantic megalith, which appeared to be a human face. And in the same area, you had a five-sided pyramid, which looks sort of like the Chrysler emblem. The long sides, 1.5 miles on an edge. You've got this face megalith, which is 3 miles from top to bottom, right? Mother Nature doesn't do straight lines or Bezier curves on a 3-mile scale. You know, something about that is, you know, it's not realistic to want to think that that's a plateau or maze of any sort. You know, particularly not when you have pyramids sitting around in the same area. Google searches will turn that image up. There have been other images showing up recently which show human footprints, and then this clear image of the shadow of a technician working on the rover. This is an MSL image, and here you've got like a technician. You can see wavy hair, you can see a face mask. The surface of Mars, I mean, the atmosphere is said to be, at the surface, is said to be about like the atmosphere on Earth at 15,000 feet. Now, that says that somebody that's not used to it would want to have a minimalistic oxygen tank, which is what this guy appears to be wearing. He's got a bottle of something or other, right? Nobody makes a vehicle which could roll around Baltimore for 3 years without any sort of maintenance. The question you have to ask yourself is, could anybody possibly make a vehicle which could roll around Mars for 3 years without any maintenance? The answer is obvious. Okay, this is a NASA employee on Mars today. The man is wearing a mask which covers his eyes and nose and a minimalistic sort of a scuba tank for oxygen. Animals and creatures which live on Mars, which are indigenous and live on Mars, don't require oxygen tanks. They're just used to it. It would be like the creatures that you would find living in a mountain at 15,000 feet. You've got another case of NASA employees showing up in these MSL images. You've got the website gigapan.com offers groups of continuous NASA probe images which have been stitched together to amount to views of very large areas. They've been stitched into contiguous images. These images stretch several miles across in places, and in some cases a mile or more deep, right? So you're getting very large landscapes where you can still see details to a remarkable extent. Now, this is one which is in the Gigapan, I believe it's from MSL 183. Okay, you've got something which doesn't look very much when you just look at the overall view here, but when you zoom in, right about here, just a little bit off of the camera device and then up a little bit, you get a scene which shows the head of a statue over here. Then you have a piece of angle iron protruding, this is artificial, protruding from whatever all this used to be, just something which included a statue. You've got something which would appear to be a rock if you didn't know better, except the rocks don't have gull-wing doors. This is a gull-wing door like on an old 1950s Mercedes 300 SL, right? And what you have here with strawberry blonde hair is a female NASA employee, also with a minimalistic oxygen tank, right? The color of the hair caught somebody's attention. Because it's a color which doesn't normally occur on Mars, right? Now, you had to zoom like about 4 or 5 levels in order to see this stuff, right? It doesn't show at normal resolution, but there it is, right? Like I say, Facebook groups have the number of eyes that it takes to find stuff like this. Okay, again, this image is something which turned up from that original Gigapan only with 3 or 4 levels of zooming. Hugely unlikely to be any sort of a fake. Even if it is a fake, the fakery was perpetrated by NASA employees, which would be criminal. The only safe assumption is that NASA has had people on Mars for some time, and for whatever reason does not believe the American taxpayer deserves to know about, needs to know about it. Running an operation like that and going the extra millions of miles to keep it secret has to involve gigantic expense and efforts. What, you might ask, does Mars have to offer which would justify such extraordinary operations? The Viking probe of 76 sent back images of a region called Cydonia, which included the familiar face on Mars. And you've likely seen this picture on tabloids, right? The face on Mars. And you've also heard that NASA has called this like a mesa or just tricks of light and shadow. And there's a fancy word which they use, which is called pareidolia, which is that's the fancy word for the kind of a thing that you get when you think that you're seeing like Uncle Sam or Aunt Sally's face in a cloud or on a mountain somehow or other. Okay, and that's what NASA claims that this is. And so if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with BS, right? And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to use a big word to baffle people. This is the face on Mars, the megalithic structure as it appeared like in the low resolution images from orbit in 1976. Also from that same low resolution camera, you've got something which even then struck most people as being obviously a pyramid. You've got a structure of some sort here that's not going to occur in nature. And, these are satellite images, right? So that, these are very large, all these things like a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile on an edge. This is that five-sided pyramid. Well, they call it D&M, after the researchers de Petrie and Molinar who discovered it. The first people that saw these things, the way I've read it, were just astounded. They were just completely blown away. Some of them were just lying there on the floor. The image called The Face on Mars was the big bone of contention. Like I say, this appears to be a five-sided pyramid. We'll get back to this shortly. Okay. You had high-resolution cameras over Mars by the late 90s, right? And public pressure eventually forced NASA to re-image this face megalith. This is what they get. Now here you've got like straight lines, you've got Bezier curves, and from here to here is about 2.5 or 3 miles. Again, Mother Nature doesn't do straight lines and Bezier curves on a 3-mile scale. This is a helmet of some sort. It's supposed to look like that. The whole thing's made to be seen from off planet, right? You've got lips, you've got nostrils, you've got eyes, right? And the whole thing is the proportion of a human face. There's only one way you could build something like this. You would have to just pile rocks on top of more rocks, large rocks at the bottom, and then progressively smaller rocks until you had the form that you wanted, and then put some sort of a hard casing over it, concrete or cement or something. And what you can see here is that the wind comes this way, like in the picture from the lower left to the upper right, that on the windward side, this facing is weathered. You can see this. And on the leeward side, this facing is falling away in slabs. You can see the eye, even as the slabs of the facing fall away, right? The document contains my own description of what happened. In other words, the rock plate on which the thing sits was picked up and slammed down. It distorted the face, which appears to be warped. Okay, the megalith is heavily damaged, but you can see what it is. Not a problem. This is that five-sided pyramid, the way it looks in the high-resolution images from 2001. Okay, you've got like an equilateral triangle here, and Mother Nature doesn't do equilateral triangles. This is 1.5 miles from one corner to the other. You've got what appear to be buttresses on the corners, just supports, right? And then you've got damage over here that didn't survive completely intact. You've got another pyramid off to one side, which is probably more like 1/2 mile from one corner to the other. And if you didn't know better, you might think that what you're getting here is like not exactly a good pyramid. It's like this is just wind being blown, or sand being blown up by the wind. You've got at the bottom of this thing, you've got either 2 tennis courts or 2 large doors or portals or something, right? But this is not natural either. Okay, this would be my impression of what you're actually seeing. You've got like the pyramid itself, right? You've got equilateral triangles, and then you've got like sand being blown up into a sort of an apron against this one face, right? And then you've got a sort of a tunnel or something like that, and a covered tunnel, and then whatever these things are. Okay, none of this stuff is natural. Early pioneers in publishing these kinds of images included Richard Hoagland. It's fairly well known, and also the late Dr. Thomas Van Flandern, who was a director of the Naval Observatory, and who, I don't know what the status of this website is. It was called metaresearch.org. That site documented some of NASA's shenanigans. And what did Tom Van Flandern have to say about these images, and particularly about the face image? What Tom said about the face megalith was that there's no rational way to call it pareidolia, right, or any kind of a wishful thinking effect. In cases of pareidolia, in fact, he regarded this as provable, right? He said that, like, in cases of real pareidolia, you know, when you see a cloud or a mountain formation which looks like, you know, Uncle John or Aunt Sally, then the closer you get to it, or the higher resolution image you take, the less it looks like Uncle John or Aunt Sally, right? Whereas this thing is the opposite of that. You know, in the case of this face image, the closer you get to it, the more it looks like a human face. The higher resolution image you get, the more it looks like a human face, right? It's the opposite of pareidolia, right? It's the opposite of what the claim was. You know, he regarded that as positive proof of the artificiality of that face megalith, as well as some of the other things in that region. The region, again, is called Cydonia. If you look that up, I mean, there's a rose, which is called Cydonia, and then you've got this region on Mars, which is called Cydonia. You've had, like, several generations of these images. Now you have, like, the original low-resolution images taken by the Viking probe in '76. You have, like, Pathfinder images, which were taken by an earlier version of a rolling probe, like, which was launched in the early part of '96, and which set up shop on Mars in the mid part of '97. Okay, so that you had a number of images taken from '97 and '98. Right, and those were, you know, those images were clear, but I don't think they did as good a job of imaging things in the distance as the MSL does. Okay, for the last 3 or 4 years, we've had these MSL images, which I believe are much better. What all do these images show? They show clear remains of cities and villages with roads, bridges, buildings, and other urban infrastructure. They show remains of large-scale infrastructure. They show remains of walls with fitted stones, remains of foundations of buildings, remaining trees and vegetation, water both flowing and standing. Such pools and streams frequently seen in near proximity to artifacts of past habitation. Now, I haven't seen anything that looks like a large river in any of these images. What I've seen are, you know, large ponds and small lakes. And I've seen water flowing down from rocky areas, from hills and mountains, and, you know, what I would call streams, right, more than rivers. But all those things do show mechanical junk and debris strewn across the sands. Most of these kinds of items are obviously artificial, but of unknown usage. Occasionally you see something which is easily recognizable: gear wheels, cogs, tires, axles, funnels, padlocks, common items, obvious gateways and portals to underground areas. Now, they've never rebuilt the surface on Mars. You know, the catastrophes which destroyed Mars didn't destroy it, right? But I mean, the wreckage which you see was created by cosmic disasters, and they've never had the wherewithal to rebuild the place, or at least not on the ground, right? One of Mars' small moons, Phobos, turns out to be artificial. It's an ancient space station of some sort. Real moons are supposed to be made out of dirt and rocks and green cheese. They're not supposed to reflect light all over creation like a mirror. Okay, Phobos appears to be made of metallic strakes. It does reflect light all over creation. Living creatures. The air at Mars' surface is said to be about like that on Earth at 15,000 feet. Creatures which you'd expect to see under such conditions, which survived the catastrophe somehow or other, include insects, snakes, small mammals, which have a relatively easy time with the thin air due to their natural square cube advantage. Recent images, in fact, show all these things. Unless a catastrophe were to annihilate a planet like Mars altogether, no catastrophe could ever kill all the mice and rats, and, you know, it couldn't kill the little red, orange woolly bullies that chase mice and rats. It couldn't kill all the bugs. It couldn't, you know. There's no shortage of things on Mars which look like rocks because they are rocks. Okay, there are a lot of rocks on Mars. You've got like a lot of things which the electric universe people like to talk about on Mars, electrical scars, particularly that gigantic Val Marineris, okay, which is it's a gigantic electrical scar which is caused by interplanetary electrical discharge. It looks like the Grand Canyon on Earth, only it's much bigger than the Grand Canyon. Okay, you get people trying to claim that there must have been a nuclear war on Mars, and like at the secret space program conferences that you see, people will be claiming that there was never a nuclear war on Mars. Okay, the damage that you see was caused by a series of catastrophes which began like about 10 or 15,000 years ago with the final capture of the southern part of our system by our present sun. Okay, there's no nuclear weapon which could create the Val Marineris. There's no nuclear weapon which could create the general impression that you get on Mars from these gigapan images, which look as if the entire planet was just picked up and shaken the way a dog might shake a rat. Okay, the evidence that you see does not say nuclear war. The evidence says cosmic disaster. The quantity of anomalous items is so vast, it's fairly easy to show only the top 5% of undeniable items still have an overwhelming case for past habitation. A person needs to go over one or two of these Facebook groups, pages, and websites mentioned above to get any sort of a feeling for the enormity of this body of evidence at this point in time. But a few examples here. Okay, I'm going to try to provide examples of the various things which I mentioned above in that little list. Okay, you've got cities and villages. Here we have the Hale crater area, and it looks like just a desert, right? This is one of these things which NASA tried to hide by smearing, by, just adjusting contrast and brightness until the details just sort of went away, right? You want to download the TIFF image. You don't, if you can find a TIFF image, right? TIFF means lossless. It's a bitmap image, right? It's like the JPEG process loses information at a low level. Right, so when you're looking for fine detail in images, you'd rather have a TIFF image. At any rate, you could take the TIFF image of this thing and just convert it to grayscale and just sit there and fiddle with brightness and contrast. And very shortly, what you begin to see, and I had to convince myself, I had to follow these steps myself, right, just to convince myself these people were not just sitting there smoking too much reefer or anything like that. Right, I mean, this is what the same Hale crater looks like when you do just the littlest bit of fiddling, right? From here to here, you've got buildings, you've got rectangular buildings with flat roofs. You've got urban infrastructure, right? I mean, this is, and I can also tell you that I've worked with JPEG image software and that there isn't any way. See, the JPEG image software smears any kind of noise which might occur in an image like this. There's no way that something like that could be an image artifact. I mean, certainly not with the JPEG image. Okay. At any rate, like I say, I mean, I'm seeing this stuff in the TIFF images when I go and fiddle with brightness and contrast with the TIFF images. So, you don't even have to worry about JPEG images for this. There was another region which looked even more like urban infrastructure, and it's a little bit harder to reclaim this one from the original. I've done it. I've convinced myself that this is real. You've got vanishing point perspective. You've got roads and bridges and buildings, and this is a city. Okay, this is an image which used to exist on Tom Van Flanderen's website. Again, Tom Van Flanderen was a director of the Naval Observatory, which is housed in the same building as the Vice President's office on Mass Avenue in Washington, D.C., upper northwest, right? What you're seeing here is terracing, and you're seeing buildings which are squarish and rectangular, and you can see that the wind appears to be coming from, which way is it? It's like wind appears to be coming from the lower left here. It's like you've got the windward side of these buildings is weathered. I don't know if I just said that right, but at any rate, the windward side of the buildings are weathered, right, and the leeward sides are fairly sharp still. You've got things which appear to be suburban street infrastructure. This is this hydroids chaos region. Okay, and these are streets and, artificial infrastructure, right? I mean, that's not natural. Walls and fitted stones in these images. Okay, I mean, these turn up numerous places. You've got some buildings, and this could be natural. I mean, this is just, any two people could have two different opinions on this. This could be something which was constructed using sandbags or something like sandbags, or it could be something which is natural. I don't really know. But these images occur, no shortage of them in the MSL images. You've got mechanical junk and debris that you find lying strewn across the sands. You've got something which obviously artificial, right? I mean, it could be the remains of the fender of a car or something, who knows, right? You've got gear wheels. This is a gear wheel here. It's mechanical junk, really. I mean, just evidence of a past civilization. This is some sort of a box. I'm going to just go over some of these images. You've got something here. You've got things which appear to be metallic, which are parts of engines or parts of metal things lying around. And this is all over Mars, right? You've got things like this. This, anybody's guess, right? It could be a piece of furniture. Sorted nondescript. I mean, this looks like the face of a cuckoo clock or something. It's not natural. Just lying there on the sand. Same with this. No way to tell what that was. It's completely nondescript. But again, I mean, there's no rock that looks like that. Remains of a barber shop, maybe. No way to tell, but again, it's not natural. Here we've got what I call the golden manhole cover, and this is just lying there in the sand. I think it's a fairly safe bet that NASA never dragged a manhole cover up to Mars. I can't picture a reason of wanting to do that. It's been lying there for millennia, and what it is exactly, who knows? This appears to be a padlock, funnel. This I thought was pretty obvious. This is either a propeller blade or a fan of some sort, okay, but you can see the hub and you can see at least two of the blades are in fairly good shape. Still, just lying there on the sands. You see remains of small ships and boats in the areas where you have water, okay, so that, these people did go out on the water occasionally. You've got wooden beams lying around. It's not uncommon. Gateways to subterranean areas. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. There are people living on Mars. I mean, not just NASA employees. There are indigenous people living on Mars, okay, that don't live out on the surface. They come out on the surface for half an hour, 40 minutes during the day for sunlight and vitamin D, right? But they mostly live underground, so that you find a lot of doorways and portals to subterranean areas on Mars, right? I mean, you've got things which look like garage doors. You've got things which look more like just doors or gateways. But I mean, this is not just a jagged hole in a rock or something. This is well formed, right? I mean, this is a portal to an underground area. SOL 712, right? This is a little bit harder to see. I mean, that's a doorway. This is pretty clear. I mean, Mother Nature doesn't do things like this, right? I mean, this is another kind of a doorway or window into some kind of a place where people live. Now, you've got large structures, the remains of large structures on Mars. This is the remain, I mean, no idea what it would have been, some sort of a building, right? But it's not small. You've got like I said, the various types of things like that. This is another type of a building. This is one of the clearest cases that I know of a structure of some sort of house or a building. You've got a rock sitting here to the right. Now, this is nothing, like I said, no shortage of real rocks on Mars. But here you've got like a structure which has got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 edges, which are all perfectly straight. And then you've got 2 sides, which are perfectly flat, right? Mother Nature doesn't do things like that. Okay, you can follow, if you download your own copy of this document, you can follow the link to the NASA site. Shows that you have on Mars at least one case of there being something like our own Sphinx in Egypt, right? Now, you've got, again, you could follow the NASA link if you download the document. You've got a structure over here with a rectangular doorway, which is fairly obvious. And then you have like the remains of a statue or some kind of a thing, the head of which at least appears to be human. Now, let's take a little bit more of a look at this. This is with the color levels auto-adjusted just using GIMP, right? And here you see the structure. It's a little bit clearer with colors. You don't have this encrusted look that way. Here's the structure, right? And you can see the way the thing is built. It's wreckage, right? It's not like in perfect condition, but the doorway is still, it's obvious. You don't have to guess that, that this is a door, right? It's made for entrance and exit. Here you've got Rami Bar-Ilan, right, who has said, okay, let's just use Photoshop or something like that and turn the head around and put it back up on top of the structure. And if you do that, you can see what he's done, right? Then what you end up with is something very similar to the Sphinx in Egypt, right? Now, I believe there's just as good a chance that this may have been a standing statue of some sort. I'm not completely convinced of this. I believe this is a possibility. I don't believe this is proven, right? But you get the idea, right? You only have to turn this head around and it's like all of a sudden it's very obvious what you're seeing. At least the fact that you've got a human head here sitting on top of some other part of a statue or a construction of some sort. A large structure here. Here you've got something where, you seem to be seeing lettering over here. There are more than a few of these MSL images which show lettering. Just words written down on buildings, right? You see names, buildings on buildings, that we have now, right? It's not a new idea or anything. You seem to have packets of, you seem to have like doorways here and then packages of something or other inside the door. Okay. If you zoom in a little bit, this becomes more obvious. You can see what you're seeing here. You've got a flat roof to the place, then you've got an opening, and then you've got what would appear to be packets. This is the area that you're looking at, okay? It's like you've got in the lower foreground, you've got standing water, okay? And then the structure is up over here, right? This is the structure with the packets and the doorways. And then, like I said, this is either a very large pond or a small lake, because it's medical choice. Phobos, right? Richard Hoagland was claiming that Phobos was artificial before you had color images, right? He was claiming you could almost count the rivets, even in the black and white images that we had, right? In 2008, we got the HiRISE project images from the University of Arizona. And those images show Phobos to be made of metallic streaks. You can see this, it's highly reflective. Like I said, real moons are not supposed to be reflective. Now, One of the things that you read on the internet and various places is that at least one Russian probe has taken penetrating radar soundings of Phobos and has shown in like rectangular interior spaces, so that it appears to be a space station of some sort, only 15 miles across. Right, it's much bigger than anything that we've ever built here on Earth. There's a story as to what would have to happen for something like this to get built, and that's another document in that file section of the Ganymede hypothesis group. Okay, there's a thing which appears to be a docking station on Phobos. If you do a Google search on Phobos anomaly, this picture turns up. Woolly bullies, right? What is it that chases the mice and the rats and the squirrels on Mars? You've got this little guy here who shows up, and it's not a very distant image or something. It's just from the camera to the lower part of the rover itself, right? You've got this guy's, you can see his nose and his eyes and, the red-orange color. He's investigating the wiring harness of the rover, right? Fortunately, it doesn't seem to have tried to chew on the thing. This shows the woolly bully, the way he actually appears in the photo. Go on a little bit further. You've got other images which show the woolly bullies, right? I mean, there's several. This appears to be the same little red-orange woolly bully, that's investigating the wiring harness up there. You've got at least one image which seems to show a snake on Mars, which would be this, right? Bugs. That's not the most obvious picture of a bug that I've ever seen, but that does appear to be what it is. And I think we've just come to the end of this image here. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. I said there were two images I wanted to go over here, but we're going to take a look at the other one, right? We're still in the Opera browser. We're going to go back to the Ganymede hypothesis, right? The file section. And the other document is called Mars Indigenous, right? We're going to click on that. And that brings up a PDF document, which we're going to double click on, and then again, make it readable for older people here. Okay. This is something which I've only become convinced of within this year. Okay, so I've been seeing claims of this for the last year and a half or 2 years or so, but I became convinced of this like around January, February of 2016. Images coming back from Mars since '76 began with low-res Viking probe images. Okay. What is clear at this point includes the following. There are lots of rocks on Mars. Many of the images show little other than rocks, right? They're electrical scars, including the gigantic Valmeraneris. Most of Mars shows the sort of damage it anticipated the entire planet had simply been picked up and shaken. Both rock plates and remains of structures lying around Catawampus. Okay, recent catastrophes. There's overwhelming evidence of prehistoric civilization on Mars, including both large and small structures, remains of cities and villages, statues, ships, boats, mechanical debris, odd objects strewn across the sand in many places. Okay, there's small animals on Mars. Okay, this is the squirrel on Mars. You can find this on Google. Just type in squirrel on Mars, right? And go to a Google image search. In fact, what they will give you, let's try this. Let's say open link in a new tab, right? This is the NASA image, which contains the squirrel, right? Let's see if we can find him. Okay, I don't know if you can see this. This is the squirrel down here on a real, honest-to-God NASA image. And you might want to zoom a little bit. Let me just hit Control plus just a few times. Okay, as if we had some really old. Oops. I don't want that. That's my That's not what I want. Okay. May not be doing too well with this. It's like, somehow or other lost this one. Yeah, here we go. Here we go. Here's the squirrel on Mars again. Like I say, this is in a NASA image. I'm sorry, I got lost there a little bit, but I just wanted you to see that. That's the squirrel on Mars, right? Ground squirrel is something. You've got large portals into underground areas. You've got this mechanic working on the rover that you've already seen, right? You've got this image. Let's take a look at this. The way it appears like in a real gigapan. Okay, this is a real NASA. Well, it's like Neville Thompson puts these together, right? But they're created from NASA images. You can see the frames, right? These images are stitched together to form a very large contiguous image. You can see that these are made of strips. Each one of these strips appears to be like one of the edges here. Let's go to full screen here. And like I say, if you go off over here, you sort of have to know where it is, right? And here you come to the same thing that I showed you previously, right? You've got the strawberry blonde lady astronaut over here. You've got the statue head. You've got this piece of angle iron, and then the rock with the gull-wing door. This isn't a rock. Whatever this was has just been beaten up over a long period of time. Okay, so that's where this originates, right? You've got, like I said, the lady astronaut with strawberry blonde hair. This is what really convinced me of the whole thing. I mean, the fact that we're indigenous people on Mars. I mean, the lady astronaut and the gentleman working on the rover, easy enough to believe, right? But I mean, I've seen images of what are supposedly indigenous people on Mars, which I wouldn't show to anybody because too many ways it could be interpreted, right? This one is a couple of tabs more obvious than usual. It's like if you zoom in on this one, this is MSL 1049, right, with the 100mm camera. You zoom in on this one, and you've got, this is a human arm and shoulder here. I mean, the human mind and visual system do a very good job of recognizing our own, right, of recognizing human shapes and the shapes of animals that we're familiar with, right? If you zoom this a bit more, like I say, you've got a lady with a coat on, and she's peering around the corner of a doorway at the rover. A NASA employee would not be peering around a corner at the rover as if she did not know what it was. Okay, this is not another NASA employee. This is an indigenous woman. Now, like I said, this was the first thing I ever saw that convinced me of that. You've got other things here. You've got like a table of some sort here. You've got what appears to be another female figure. You've got, in this image, you've got several doorways to subterranean areas, and they all are the same size and same shape and leaned over at the same angle. It's almost as if 4 or 5 of these doorways had been purchased from the same stack over at Home Depot. 1, 2, 3 at least, which are easy to see. There's at least a 4th one, which is not quite as easy to see. Okay, and the same area, you've got a human figure, which I call the speaker. Okay, what he's doing standing there at that whatever that is, I don't know, right? But I mean, that's not just a rock. You've got several other things in the same image which could be interpreted as human figures. You've got over to the left of that, in the same gigapan image, I mean, you've got another, like I said, I mean, I wouldn't want to hang the case on this, right? But this appears to be another human figure. You've got statues on Mars, right? And no shortage of people that lived there thousands of years ago were fond of statues, right? So that you always have to ask yourself, this is a statue, that's not a living human. This, no way to tell. It could be a little girl or it could be the remains of a statue. It's hard to say. I would expect the statue to be in a bit worse shape than that. So I mean, I would, if I had to put money on it, I would say that's most likely a little girl looking at the rover from behind a rock. Now, this is the original image with with color levels just auto-adjusted again. And then we come to the grand prize, right? It's like here we get Martine Griney and her eagle eyes having turned up something which is completely unbelievable. And I want you to look at this. It's like you've got MSL 1298 here, and you've got a girl in a yellow smock sitting in front of what appears to be a house of some sort, almost like a Chinese house, you know, pagoda-like architecture. And there she is, right? Now, that image, and with just global enhancement, okay, it's like no color has been added to this. The yellows in this picture are there, right? The thing which attracted Martine's eyes to this at first was just the glint of sunlight on the girl's hair. Okay, and this girl is sitting back there like about a half or 3/4 of a mile from the camera, right? So, I mean, this is like just very good work with a camera, right? And again, NASA does not have the number of eyes it takes to find things like this. This is these Facebook groups, and in the Facebook groups, you've got 2 or 3 people who are like the world's best, you know, coming up with this kind of stuff. Martine Griney, I think, is probably #1, right? But there's no artificial color in this. I mean, these colors are there in the original NASA image. This is just, like I say, you know, a little bit better image processing than I'm capable of. Like I say, I'm just working with Irfan View and GIMP, right? I think Martine has professional software to work with. What if somebody were to say, well, that's probably a rock, right? Like maybe you've got some kind of a rock that looks like this, or, you know, how do you argue with that? Well, it turns out there's a really good way to argue with that. Let me show you what this looks like. Okay, we're going to take a look at this picture with the little girl, right, which was taken on one day, and then the exact same spot that was snapped like a couple of days later, right? Now, rocks don't ever just get up and walk away because it gets too late in the day or gets too cold or anything like that, what little girls do. So we'll see what we see, right? This is the, like a gigapan snapshot image. Okay, let's follow the link here. This is a gigapan snapshot image, which shows the little girl with her hair, and let's magnify the image here. Just go full screen with the image, right? You've got this little girl sitting in front of a kind of a house, right? And she's sitting in front of a kind of a rock, which looks like the hood of a car or something like that. And in order to convince myself of this, I had to find some landscape, landmarks which you could use. You've got, here's the girl, right? You've got a thing which looks like a sort of a paddle, okay, which is over here. It's got a piece of rock or something off to one side. You've got like a rock formation over behind all of this, and you've got some kind of a bulge in the little rock formation. Okay, and again, it starts off over here. If you zoom all the way out on this, then what you'll see is that you've got, like, over on the edge of the image, you know, the gigapan image, you've got a kind of a large rock formation, right? And you go back, you've got this paddle formation sitting back here, right? You can see this is some distance back, right? This is half a mile or 3/4 of a mile from here to there. So let's go back. Oh, I'll tell you what. I don't see the little bar. Oh, okay, I do now. Okay, back in business. Let's go back here and let's look at MSL 1302, right? This is taken a couple of days later. Like I say, rocks don't ever just get up and walk away because it gets too late in the day or something like that. And let's open this in a new tab, right? Okay, this is the exact same spot. This is that same little house with the Chinese pagoda architecture. The exact same spot, this rock which looks like the hood of a car, but the little girl isn't there. Okay, you can zoom out all the way, and you can see that this big rock formation is substantially to the right of the way it appeared in the other image, right? In other words, the camera has moved to the left, right? So that you've got a different viewing angle and you've got a different elevation. And let's get back, reload, right? It's like, let's get back to the place where the little girl would have been. This is the place where the little girl would have been, right? It's like, you know, she's gone. She got up and walked away. Little girls do get up and walk away when it gets too late in the day, when it gets too cold, when it gets to be time for dinner, whatever. You've got the same alignment, right? You could go from where the girl was to this pagoda-like building, and if you just follow the line, you end up at the top of this thing, which looks like a paddle. Then you've got the same rock structure with the same sort of a little bulge here. And you can see that you've got the same little, whatever that was on the paddle, right? The exact same place. You know, so there's no rational way to try to claim that what you're seeing here is a rock or anything like that, or rock formation, or pareidolia, or anything like that at all. This is an ironclad case. Okay, this is an ironclad case. You've got a little girl sitting on a rock here in a NASA MSL image. And NASA doesn't hire little girls to be astronauts, right? I mean, this is an indigenous human. And there's another kind of a funny thing that you might notice. Okay, it's like there's a natural evolutionary bias in all science fiction. Okay, if you believe in evolution, then, you know, you have to believe that if you ever found another living world, you know, the creatures you would see would be completely different from anything you've ever seen before. It would have to be a living world which evolved in its own way, which would be completely different from the way our living world has evolved. But that's not what you're seeing here, right? What we're actually seeing on Mars and in a couple of other places in our own system looks much more like what a religious person would anticipate, right? I mean, we're seeing people like us. We're seeing, you know, animals like that squirrel, the little woolly bull. You're seeing animals like what we're used to seeing. And it appears as if there's only one kind of, you know, I mean, I can't claim this absolutely, right? I mean, you might go Alpha Centauri and still find something unusual, right? But so far we haven't found anything unusual. What we're finding looks like there's only one kind of a living world, you know, that the basic ideas for living creatures all likely to be pretty much the same throughout the universe. You get the idea, right? All of this, I believe, is what's behind the NASA secrecy. I should make this a little bit bigger. Here it's like, lost track of that. Anything else they could have at least come up with some feeble attempt at an explanation without having to completely toss and jettison the entire theory of a history of our solar system, at least without having to look flagrant about it. Okay, it's like finding indigenous humans on a place like Mars. It's, you know, they haven't quite figured out what to think about that. Or I mean, that they obviously don't really want to go public with it just yet. Assuming that NASA actually has made contact with indigenous humans living on Mars, I think that's a pretty good assumption based on what we've just seen. A number of questions arise fairly quickly, right? Do these people know much more about human prehistory than we do, have better records going back to and possibly beyond the catastrophes than we do? Do they know anything about antediluvian civilizations on our planet or other bodies within our own solar system which we don't know? Do they have any physical and mental capabilities which we don't have? Do they have any technologies which we might be interested in? Does contact with us represent any danger to them or vice versa? I mean, there are a lot of questions saying here, right? Keeping big secrets invites conspiracy theories, right? I mean, like I say, a conspiracy theory is normally your last choice for a way to explain anything, right? But I mean, you know, at some point, there's nothing else left, right? And I think as far as NASA and JPL and these Mars images that we're getting, I don't think there's anything left at this point other than just, you know, putting two and two together, coming up with four, right? We've got a black op manned space program on Mars, and it shouldn't be a secret, right? It's like, you know, keeping things like that secret invites every kind of a conspiracy theory. That's going to be it for the evening. Let me see if I can back out of all this stuff. We're in, we were in the Opera browser just now. I'm going to shut that down, right? Go back to the Einstein mirror clock here. Stop broadcasting.